Hello! Hi everyone! Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're kicking off a brand new series inspired by the many requests that I have gotten for vegetarian and or veggie friendly recipes, particularly those involving the use of tofu. Now, if you're like me, I have always been really frustrated with how tofu is used in American vegetarian recipes, mostly because they involve using tofu as a meat substitute. So, before we go any further, tofu is not chicken, nor is it Angus steak or ground pork. It doesn't really matter what you do to it, it will never taste like any of those things. However, there are many uses of tofu throughout Asian and Chinese cuisine in particular that are built around tofu as a central ingredient rather than a substitute, which means that the approach involved is going to be much more conducive to creating a tender, toothsome, and tasty piece of tofu. More specifically, today we'll be taking a shot at a Chinese stir-fry classic Wusiu Tofu, or braised firm tofu that has been shallow fried with veggies and tossed in a dark soy sauce and oyster sauce braise. It's one of my absolute favorite tofu dishes because the fry and braise method gives us a toothsome but also deeply flavorful piece of tofu. To add to this, it's also a little bit more approachable than the similar Shao tofu recipe that we did a little while back, since that involved using a light breading and deep fry, which is a little bit more labor intensive. Okay, so let's get into it. Alright, so kicking things off here first, I'm starting off as we often do in our Chinese recipes with 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of finely minced ginger. We're setting these 2 elements aside for the initial aromatic fry of our wok cook later on, then diving into some green onions next. I've got some older looking green onions here which I thought I'd take a look at here today since we'll have the opportunity to do so. I've had these in water for about a week or so to help these stay fresh, but you'll notice that some of the greens are starting to wilt and parts of the whites are also starting to come apart as well. This is still totally usable. I'm just picking off the wilted bits and then peeling off the first layer of the onion around the white portion so that we don't end up with any chewy bits in our fry. Then finally, I'm removing the root ends, slicing up the whites thinly for our aromatic fry, then going for large planks about 1 inch long or so for our greens. This is kind of similar to how we used our greens in our Mongolian beef recipe a few months ago too. These are going to be the only source of leafy greens in our stir fry today, so the larger planks are going to be really useful here. Next up are my carrots, which I'm removing the root and tip ends, then peeling and slicing up into thin coins on a bias. I like to sort my carrots by size before slicing these things up because it helps me get even sizes to my coins, so if you've got this problem, definitely give this a shot. Next up is my firm tofu, which I'm slicing into squares. This is a big part of the classic Wusiu Tofu presentation, so no tofu cubes today. Then finally, last up are some shiitake mushrooms, which I'm rehydrating in boiling water. Mine are thinner, so this only took me about 5 minutes, but if you've got thicker ones, it can take up to 25 minutes or so plan accordingly and do this part first if that's what you've got. Once they're nice and tender, I'm reserving about half a cup of that water for our braise later on. This stuff is going to be full of umami, so don't go and dump this down the drain. Next up is our braising sauce, which is going to be where all of our deep and rich umami flavors are going to come from today. We're starting things off with 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and 1 tablespoon of sesame oil, then diving into the big 3 elements that you might recognize from many of our braised recipes now. This is a tablespoon each of dark soy sauce, black vinegar, and oyster sauce for our deep and rich umami today. Finally, I'm rounding this out with a tablespoon of brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine, and 2 tablespoons of Laogan chili crisp oil for a little bit of subtle heat. Then last up, in a separate bowl, I'm combining 2 tablespoons of cornstarch with water for our cornstarch slurry to thicken things up later on, and we're heading over to the stove. Over on the stove, I've got my wok heated up as hot as possible, and then I'm adding a lot of oil. This is about half a cup's worth for our shallow fry. Then, as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. Then next, here's my tofu going in, which we should be doing with tongs, Wesley. Tofu is filled with water, so inevitably there will be some oil sputtering. Now at this point, you'll notice the benefits of our round-bottomed wok is coming through here, since all of that oil is gathering at the center of the wok. This is really useful for us in our shallow fry today because it's helping our tofu stay submerged nicely without using too much oil. In a flat-bottomed wok or pan, this would take closer to a cup or two of oil for the same result. So while it might look like a lot of oil, relative to a deep fry, it's really not. We're letting this go for about 5 minutes until browned, then flipping and repeating with our remaining tofu. Then I'm doing one more long yao and moving on to our wok fry next. Here's my aromatic garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions going in. I'm tossing this until fragrant for about 15 seconds, then adding my carrots in next. These are going to be a lot more dense than the rest of our stir fry, so I like to give my carrots a solid 2-minute head start at this point. Then next up, I'm adding the remaining ingredients to my wok. Here are my shiitake mushrooms, the greens of my green onions, and my crisped up tofu going in. I'm giving this a quick toss to combine, then adding my braising sauce, followed by our reserved mushroom water. Then I'm letting this braise for about 10 minutes and adding additional water as needed if you notice things are reducing too much. Finally, last up, here's my cornstarch slurry going in to help thicken things up, and we're ready to eat. Alright, so I mentioned this earlier and I'll say it again. This is one of my absolute favorite tofu dishes of all time. For me, it's just the perfect middle ground of quick and approachable, but also still a deeply flavorful and tasty stir fry. The shallow fry on our tofu gives it a nice toothsome bite, which when combined with the long braise also adds a rich umami to it that beats the pants off of any tofu burger that I've ever had. Then that classic combination of dark soy sauce, black vinegar, and oyster sauce gives the dish that dark caramel color and rich flavor that you might recognize from a lot of our other braised recipes, like our lion's head meatball or hongshao tofu recipes not too long ago. Finally, the last thing that I'll mention is that the only animal byproduct that we used here today was in our oyster sauce, which you can find vegan-friendly versions of pretty easily, derived from mushroom powder. So if you're looking for a vegan-friendly option for dinner tonight, this is a great one to take a shot at. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a new series that we just kicked off that's dedicated to actually decent vegetarian recipes. We've got a couple more of these coming up pretty soon, but for now, in the meantime, there's also a whole playlist of vegetarian recipes on the channel as well. So definitely check those out next if you haven't yet. We'll be cooking through this one live this coming Tuesday at 6:30 PST right here on the YouTube channel, so tune in then and cook along with me if you want. Then finally, for the Bay Area locals, the Wu Can Cook Fried Rice Pop-Up will be back at the Alameda Antiques Fair this coming Sunday, so swing by and come say hi then if you can. More about that at wucancook.com/eats. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, do some interneting, and I'll see you soon. Bye. You cut me up, baby.